Thank you again for coming. This is a wonderful time for us to get together and look at our infrastructure at CISE. And thank you again for coming for this event, the Cyberinfrastructure Day 2017. This is our third year actually holding this event, and we have been blessed with so many wonderful speakers in the past, and also especially this year, where we have the privilege of having Irene Qualters come in all the way from NSF to give us the talk about the funding that comes from the NSF, and also the various projects that are involved within the NSF. We also have wonderful speakers from Mark Griswold, who came away with Microsoft in the HoloLens project, Phoebe Stewart, Mike Lewicki, also Walter Lambrecht will come later on. And new to this year, we have poster submissions, so we'll have that set up during the break time. You can also have participations in grading which posters are the best. During lunchtime, you can talk to the presenters and things like that. Also new, we'll have flash talks. So we open that 8-minute talk with the community so they can also present the works mostly from the student side. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our VP CIO, Sue Bergman, who will give her opening remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadrian. It's really great to be here this morning. I'm just so happy that we can celebrate together our third Cyber Infrastructure Day. And I really want to give our thanks to Hadrian Johari and Roger Bielefeld and the whole RCCI team for putting this day together. They work almost all year to get this done, and so we really appreciate that. And we appreciate our guest speaker, Irene Qualters, for joining us today, as well as our other distinguished faculty who will be speaking. We thank you for that. Walter Lambrecht, Mark Griswold, Phoebe Stewart, and Mike Lewicki. So we welcome all of you, faculty, staff, research scientists, grad students, postdocs, and everyone to today's program. So Roger Bielefeld gave me this impressive little news nugget the other day. In the 5-year period between 2012 and 2016, CWRU faculty have reported 272 research or scholarly publications that leveraged our HPC or other research computing services. In 2016, there were 80 of such references, publications leveraged by our HPC. It's pretty cool to be involved in those kinds of research projects here. But I don't have to tell this audience that I think, it's really great to be the top tier research powerhouse in the state of Ohio, and also just here with this team. So what I can tell you though is the strides that the UTech team has been making to deliver these world-class technology services to you. CISE Western Reserve, in conjunction with Cleveland Clinic, as Hadrian said a moment ago, has been selected as the primary educational partner for Microsoft in our HoloLens project. We've been doing this since November 2014 and have a pretty good jump on this augmented reality device. It really does help us just leverage our research, and this tool has just got, I think, so much potential, as well as augmented reality in general. Just last month, I had the pleasure of accepting the Digital Edge 50 Award for our holoanatomy curriculum at the Agenda 17 conference, which it was a big competition there for both IT and business, as well as education. So we think there's a lot that you will learn today about that device and about the kinds of opportunities we have there, and hopefully a lot more. We did, actually launched our CWRU strategic plan for IT last June, and we embrace many of the 9 initiatives today, but most likely the one that you're most interested in is Initiative 3, which is enhanced research, scholarship, creative activity, and academic innovation. So we have just a few highlights of the things that our RCCI team has been doing over this last year. They did a HPC boot camp last fall, which was a great success and had many people attend. They had now put together a 5-year plan for hardware and software refresh for the campus network, research network, the HPC, and research storage to keep our equipment and keep our infrastructure up to date. We approved a new manager position for the computing services. We are continuing to engage in Ohio Supercomputing Center and to discuss possible NSF collaborations with them. We have had 4 meetings of the non-traditional users of research computing and actually have had visitors speak there. Alan Craig from Exceed, Claudia Van Vocano from UC Berkeley, David McClure from Center for Interdisciplinary Digital Research at Stanford, and Susan Tanner and Jamie Murdoch. Susan is from CMU and Jamie is from Indiana University. We're continuing our growth of our program of embedding our RCCI staff within different research groups in order to learn more directly about what the needs are and to help with research endeavors. And this includes our NSF-supported cyber infrastructure engineer, Cindy Martin, who's working with several groups, including 2 of today's speakers, to optimize our use of the cyber infrastructure. It's really a great time here, and I can see from your agenda today that you will have a great day today. You'll be hearing from topics ranging from neural information processing, imaging for nanoparticles, and predicting material properties. You'll be exposed to speakers from among your own CWRU colleagues as well as external voices to add to the mix. So I hope you enjoy the day and enjoy each other. And let me now introduce Roger Bielefeld, who's the Senior Director for Research Computing and Cyber Infrastructure here at CWRU. Roger?
Thank you, Sue. Good morning and welcome again to the 3rd Annual Cyber Infrastructure Day. There's very little of what we take for granted today in the area of cyber infrastructure that can't be traced back to investment by the National Science Foundation. NSF funded CSNet back in 1981 for university-based computer scientists, and in 1986, NSFNet went online to connect the first NSF-funded supercomputer centers used by scientists and engineers. So these were the precursors for our internet that we hold dearly today. At one of those centers at NCSA at the University of Illinois, Mosaic, the first freely available web browser supporting both graphics and text, was developed. More recently, NSF, while continuing its funding of national supercomputer centers, has, through its Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, made significant investments in campus cyber infrastructure at universities throughout the United States. Here at CWRU, we've been able to use NSF ACI funding to significantly improve our science and research network, including our science DMZ, and to hire our cyber infrastructure engineer, Cindy Martin. I don't see Cindy here. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing the director of the NSF Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, Irene Qualters, as our keynote speaker. In her role at NSF, Ms. Qualters leads ACI in its mission to support and coordinate the prototyping, development, acquisition, and provisioning of state-of-the-art cyber infrastructure resources, tools, and services essential to the advancement and transformation of science and engineering. Ms. Qualters joined the NSF after holding several executive leadership positions, including at Silicon Graphics, Cray Research, and Merck Laboratories. At the NSF, she's provided leadership in several major investments, including two of the largest university-based supercomputers in the U.S., Blue Waters at Illinois and Stampede at the University of Texas. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Irene Qualters.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming so early. I have a number of slides here, and I know it may be typical to wait to the end to ask questions, but I would like you to actually interrupt me as I go along, because this is such a nice, small, intimate group that I think some conversation, and I'd like to hear from you, thoughts, questions, even if I can't answer your questions. So I'm going to just go through three basic topic areas. One, give you just a little intro to NSF and what we do, and then I'll give you some updates on what was called the ACI realignment, which resulted in us being in office again, and then a little bit about looking forward. So this is our mission, which actually is interesting because it's to promote the progress of science, advance national health, prosperity and welfare, and secure the national defense, which is interesting. It was our mission from the very beginning, but we really do that through the pursuit of foundational research. This slide, I think a couple of things I'd like to point out. Some of this data is 2013, so I'll just mention where it's different for 16 and 17. Our budget is about $7.7 billion we expect it to be in fiscal year 17. So we've had small increments over the years, which actually is wonderful. That's the right direction. A couple things that are unique. We do we support research. We do not do research ourselves. Many other agencies either do intramural or do a mix, such as NIH, but ours is extramural. And the other thing I think that's actually been helpful for us in discussions with our funders, which are primarily but not exclusively U.S. taxpayers, is that 94% of our budget goes out the door every year in awards, over 94%. It's 5 point something to run the foundation. And so that means actually that the 1,500 people or so that are part of NSF rely on the community. And you'll see there that it says 38,000 reviewers. That's not us. That's the research community, largely academics, some industry and other agencies. So we couldn't do what we do without you. And even further, about 40% of those 1,500 people are actually academic researchers who have taken 1 to 4 years off of their research in order to come into the NSF. So I'm putting out this pitch, if any of you, so that's 40%, it's a very high number. If you, and it's a within opportunity to see a breadth of research across many different areas. Within OAC, we have about 50-50 of the program directors are IPAs, and 50 are permanent staff. And we have a neuroscientist, we have computer scientist, we have a economic person, we have a geologist. So we have a mirror image of some of what I think is here. And the other thing I would point out is we get in about 50,000 proposals a year, and we fund we've been pretty consistent, about 22% overall, and that varies widely from directorate and program, et cetera, some as low as 5%, some as high as 30 or even 40%. But on average, about 22% gets funded. And the other thing I think that is really a hallmark of the work we do is really preparing the next generation. And so that's the funding for students is extremely large. It's about 50,000 out of the 300,000. And we really, again, are trying to ensure that research across the U.S. advances can happen everywhere, no matter where you are. And this, again, has an impact on our approach and our priorities for cyber infrastructure. So we're organized functionally, if you will, and as you'll see, that has some advantage. We have deep expertise across a variety of domains, but as you'll see, more and more of the research frontiers are either inter or multi or even what we call now transdisciplinary, where you really need expertise in more than one, and you need to be able to work with others from different fields, and that has challenges all its own. The other thing I'd point out here, just as an organization, there are basically from the director to the program director. The program director is perhaps at the lowest level. There's typically division directors or office heads, then an AD, and then the director. So it's a very flat organization, which really helps the atmosphere be quite dynamic. And the other thing that I point out is that all of the ADs, who are the assistant directors, are IPAs. So there's constant change of ideas, refresh of ideas going on, and that it really makes it a vibrant place to work. So if anyone's interested, please contact me. So I'm going to move to CISE, which is the directorate that NSF's Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure is in, and it's in the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate. And as I said before, increasingly the priorities that CISE pursues, like others, are more than one discipline. So for example, in understanding the brain, there's clearly computer science aspects of that, but there's biology, there's social behavioral, there's physics. And so these are increasingly our initiatives are multiple directorates, multiple disciplines required. And even in areas such as cybersecurity, it's clearly not just a technology challenge, it's the human challenge as well. And clearly in the big data, you bring in the data science aspects of mathematics, statistical approaches, as well as domain knowledge and expertise. And in the bottom set of priorities, this is the other thing that's happening, not just multiple fields of scientific research, multiple agencies, such as the National Strategic Computing Initiative, which has 8 agencies involved in it, smart cities, which is actually combining often cities and states, governments, as well as industry and research. Computer science for all, really getting into the K through 12, which isn't normally where NSF goes, and advanced wireless research, which is intimately involved with industry. So we're really, as I said, the environment that we're in is really embedding research in many different areas where it hasn't been traditionally or hasn't been as deeply integrated as previously, and that has a lot of implications on the kind of research infrastructure that's needed. So just a little bit on size. I'm not going to dwell on this, but at the agency-wide at about 7.7 billion. We're on the 16 budget is nearly $1 billion. So a sizable percent of the agency, and our numbers about students and proposals and panels are pretty much in line with the overall foundation numbers. One other thing I was going to point out here that's interesting is from, as you look at, as I mentioned before, this type of transdisciplinary or research frontiers that require that more than one area in order to advance the field. And we're particularly well positioned. This is the percentage of federal funding to academia, and it excludes NIH. So the biology piece is not, NIH would dwarf this clearly because we don't support medical or the types of areas that NIH, although there is some overlap in the biology. But the other thing you'll see is that 82% of the computer science research, and given the depth that computer science and cyber is permeating all the other areas, it's, frankly, it puts a lot of pressure on that community from an academic side. And both in terms of being able to produce what's needed for the future and support what needs to happen in the other disciplines. From a budget side, again, just looking at the trends, this is, these numbers or these lines just represent how the divisions or the sections within the overall directorate have been going. And again, trending pretty much in line with the overall NSF budget. From a leadership perspective, everyone likes to think they're unique, and my group does too, but truly we're the only one of the groups within CISE that is not doing fundamental research. We're really doing cyber infrastructure, which can be use-inspired and exploratory research, but that's not, we're not fundamentally a research group. And the other piece is that we have ties across all the other directorates and support a number of co-funding activities. So, as I mentioned, we are focused on research cyber infrastructure, not infrastructure as a whole, not even cyber as a whole. So things having to do with next generation of email systems or things like that, we don't, or even search, unless it's specific to research, we don't get involved. And that's appropriate to the budget. Our budget is about $220 million overall annually. And so obviously we're not carrying the load for the research cyber infrastructure for the country. Frankly, the universities, you all are carrying that load. Most research that happens, NSF supported or otherwise, in this country really is supported by the institutions, and other agencies are involved as well. So I wanted to actually back up. I'm going to give updates. These are just things that have happened in the last year that I thought might be relevant, and maybe they're not, but they might be. And I wanted to give you a view on what's going on with public access, which has to do with access to research results and data, and how we're fitting in with other agencies and how that's playing out in proposals and awards. I wanted to talk about the realignment of examination and review of the realignment of the office, what is now the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, which was previously the Division of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, and before that was an office. I think it really mirrors in some way the complexity of organizationally fitting cyber infrastructure. And I see it playing out on campuses as well as in various agencies. I want to talk a little bit about mid-scale infrastructure and how that relates to cyber infrastructure, because I think there'll be new opportunities for funding coming down the road. And then I wanted to just recognizing CI as infrastructure, as part of the research infrastructure. I want to talk a little bit about that. a little bit about NSF's big ideas, which are about a year old now. So, as I said, please stop me, or if not, I'll just keep going faster. Public access was initiated out of the executive branch, but it is really clear from a research, and this is public access to research results, and it's a very important topic, and it's a very deep topic. And traditionally, we have focused on publications being the far easier, both in terms of value to the public as well as other researchers. But I'm going to talk a little bit about data because that's been going along at kind of a softer level, but it's still moving, and I wanted to just mention that. So NSF is committed to expanding public access to research results. And really that's motivated by accelerating the dissemination of that research so that it will in turn advance the frontiers of knowledge and help ensure the nation's prosperity. So it's really quite fundamental. And it's a complex issue, so it has taken quite a while. So in 2012, we formed an internal group. We actually published our plan in 2015. It was really, as I said, focused on journals, and it was implemented actually at the end of 2015. So this is the first full year that we've had it in place, and it does require the deposit of publications in a database that's available through research.gov, and we collaborated with the U.S. Department of Energy on this, so we're essentially using their system that's been tailored so it meets our needs, but we're basically using the same system. And the other piece of it that has been moving but not been updated recently has to do with repositories. And data repositories are a subset within the data management plan. Every proposal requires a data management plan. And the practices vary substantially across the disciplines. And because what constitutes reasonable data management in neuroscience may not be what constitutes reasonable data management for astronomy data. They're very different. And so this is top-down guidance, but bottom-up implementation. And yes.
Simple question, where do you count code? So you just had data repositories and you had publications, and code is halfway between each.
Yes, so nominally, it's a good question. I don't know if everyone could hear it. Where do we count software? And it's a really important one, actually. So we have been treating it under the data space as a special aspect of data. And, you know, I have put this in a very NSF-centric way, but clearly publishers are requiring more data, more software, and so that infrastructure, if you will, is also coming along with community input, and I expect that to continue to evolve. I would also say, while we have a bias towards open, you know, in our discussions with industry, as well as others, there are so many licenses for open source and so many different restrictions. It's quite a complicated landscape. And, you know, so you have to go back to what is the value you're trying to get out of that open source. And, you know, it also doesn't, if you're really trying for reproducibility, which could be a reason to do it, it's unclear that, trying to do open source of everything in that stack, that it could affect the reproducibility and does affect the reproducibility, it's not clear that that's actually doable. So I think there's some, I'm personally very interested, and we are very interested in rationalizing that. So we maintain our bias to open, but we support software projects that have closed or things that aren't public available. You just have to say why you made the choice you made. So I'm interested in what you think for the future, really, because it's a tough problem, but it has some of the same issues as data generally. So just a word on repositories, because I also know this is a big issue at universities, and people are in various stages. So we don't hold repositories for research data, we being NSF. And it doesn't require communities to deposit in certain repositories. That said, some communities do say, we want, this is non-digital data, but bio says, we want you to use iDigBio, or we want you to use, so they do specify. And certainly for certain types of research, if you think of the polar, we support the research for the world, actually, the infrastructure for the research of the world at the Antarctic. And there are treaties, international treaties, that govern where that data has to go and who has access to it. So, we don't, we really advocate community-driven decisions on repositories. And this is in early stages yet. Some communities are further. Geosciences in some ways is a bit further along, but even there, things are changing. So we do support efforts, and we've made a number of awards to understand and address repository needs for communities, various communities. And we also strongly support the idea of sharing and interoperability where that makes sense. So anyway, that's all I was going to say. It's a rich topic. And we do continue to fund activities. We continue to participate in interagency. We continue actually to participate with publishers in both workshops and meetings. And I think we're making progress, but it's a tough area. And now moving on to the Advanced Cyber Infrastructure. This was a divisional realignment review. It's really a bit internal rather than external, but I'm mentioning it because we did, the director asked for a Dear Colleague letter out to the community soliciting input on how things were working, and we supplied data about what kind of activities we were funding, what were the funding rates before and after, how much co-funding was happening among disciplines, because we typically about, I want to say 25% or thereabouts of our activities in infrastructure are actually co-funding with one or more of the science directorates. So we examined those things, made them public, had a public comment period. The findings were analyzed, and the conclusion was that within the Computers and Information Science and Engineering Directorate, that things were being well managed. The budget was appropriate and in line with what one would expect. It did also say that the leadership visibility for cyber infrastructure, given its role across the foundation, was important both externally and internally. So in the outcomes, it reinforces some activities that are intended to address that. So it managerially remains where it is. It has its own advisory committee, like all directorates, and it serves across foundation. So that advisory committee continues. The office head participates now in even more senior leadership meetings, and that it's the national search. When new leaders are sought, there will be a national search. And so those are really the conclusions. Now I wanted to switch a little bit ahead on, I'm skipping ahead, I'm plucking out a big idea. There are 10 big ideas that were developed across the foundation last summer, really trying to look way out and say, what are the big ideas that we should be focused on for the future? And I'll give you at least a little bit of look at those. But there were 4 process ideas among those 10 about how we could do what we do better and better position for the future. And one of them had to do with research infrastructure. And originally this was really around telescopes, interferometers, all kinds of sensor networks, etc. But it really, as the discussion really started, it really became clear that cyber infrastructure needed to be considered in that as well. And the problem is that we have solicitations, notably major research instrument solicitation, that can be used for that whole range of activities, but it's capped at 4 million. And then we had the major research facilities, the large the International Telescope in the Atacama Desert, LSST, the radio telescopes, the Large Hadron Collider over in Switzerland, another international. But that there were a whole host of smaller than that scale, but still really needed to be treated not as a research activity, but as an infrastructure that has its own sustainability, its own needs for dynamic change. And so that was the motivation for looking at this. And the idea is that much science is really undone if you don't address this issue in a way that is optimal for advancing that research. And so, again, as I said, cyber infrastructure was a key motivator there. Also looking at the different, there are needs for different time scales and dollars, and that the issue of being quite dynamic rather than a single award or a facility that's constructed and then is operated, but something that had much more dynamic flavor to it was needed. And so what was done initially was to lower the threshold for the MERFC to 70. You can still see there's a big gap there, but this is first step. And I think looking at the processes around MERFC will be really the second step, and that is MERFC is a very heavyweight built for constructing a facility, and it isn't really attuned. So the next really step is going to be, how do we get something that's a little more agile and can meet the needs of something like a cyber infrastructure? And there's a lot of support for this, particularly among Bio, Geo, MPS, and ourselves. Those groups are seeing the need for this. And in the meantime, there was an act that just came out, the America Competes Act, actually called out this area, and we will be going back to Congress in 180 days. It was passed not too long ago, and reporting to the appropriation committees. But this is not that, but one of the things that did happen recently, in fact, just 2 weeks ago, is the House Science Committee, it's Science, Space, and Technology Research Subcommittee, invited DOE and NSF to come in and talk about research infrastructure. And what was striking about that was that cyber infrastructure was clearly front and center in that discussion, a major piece of that discussion. So both from DOE and from NSF. So Jim Carosi represented us, and Jim Olds was there from Bio, but also Steve Binkley from DOE. So it was a good and positive exchange, and so I think a sign of the future, and it was also quite supportive. So moving ahead, so recognizing CI as research infrastructure and looking at the role that NSF plays, and I'll get to this at the end. One of the things, we take a very large view of what constitutes research infrastructure, and we look at it as an ecosystem. And as I said, we're not the only, NSF-supported activities are not the only things in this ecosystem, whether they're cyber infrastructure or not. But there are a couple of areas that we focus on. One is capabilities that might be beyond the reach of an institution, and where we can complement and connect with, and actually that's the second point. So think capabilities that are beyond the reach of an individual institution. And then activities, both human and technical, that really connect the research community. And again, many of those we don't have to do. Things relying on cell phones and email, which are all part of that fabric, we don't need to do. But there are some pieces that I'll give you a couple of examples of, more on the technical than the human side. The human side is really, I think, in our thinking, is not really very mature. So I'd really be interested in some thoughts about career paths, about how we do this, a promotion of co-design with CI for new areas of research. But I've given a couple of examples here of either projects or solicitations that we have. And notably, I think as was mentioned, you have under the CC, which is the 16-567, which is supporting networking, and again, the human as well as the technical piece. And also other key ones are probably the data infrastructure building blocks. That's in year 5. And that's really been trying to stimulate innovation and connections, not yet at a national level, but more at campus to campus. For example, we have the Pacific Research Platform, which is trying to do science DMZ, somewhat similar to SDNs across all of the California campuses and research groups. We had, for example, Cornell, University of Buffalo, and University of Southern California trying to share both resources and people, and then go to the cloud in case those capabilities are exhausted. So we've tried to really stimulate a number of activities that will help the data infrastructure start to mature and evolve. So just following on that network side, so we have funded, and it's now it's well over 200, on the order of 240 really awards, some larger but more smaller, both at upgrading technical and human capability in a way that we hope can be sustained, because we can't support every network, research and education network in the country, but we really wanted to ensure that the nation as a whole could step up a little bit on this capability, because it's such a fundamental underpinning. We're trying something actually on the security side as well. But not a little less visible is that we actually support international networks, again, through awards to institutions, and we stand behind those by partnering with our fellow agencies or on the other side in Brazil, for example, or in Japan, or in the EU with the JAUNT, and even sometimes with DOE as they're building up capability through the UK. So we have a really robust international network to support U.S. researchers and their access to data and collaborations. And, you know, this, I'm not going to dwell on this, but this, you could really see how this played out, not just at the network level, but at the software, computation, workflow, data flow level with LIGO. And I'm going to call it a few things here, but not unless you want to go into some detail. So clearly, this was LIGO has detected gravitational waves. This starts 100 years ago. Einstein's theory of general relativity, no evidence. It's a great theory, no evidence. So, you know, was probably 30 years ago. Several physicists came and said, if you fund us millions and tens of millions of dollars over, we'll build an interferometer, we'll build two, and we'll be able to detect evidence, we'll be able to detect gravitational waves, which will be a confirming piece of Einstein's theory of general relativity. So this is big science, this is high risk. And forgive me if I'm if I'm oversimplifying. I mean, it's really quite profound. But they came back after some number of years, maybe 10, maybe not quite that long, and said, "Oops, it's not these interferometers. They're not quite sensitive enough. We need more money, a lot more money. But we're sure we're going to get it this time." And so. The foundation did, and son of a gun, they're just bringing up these new interferometers. One's down in Louisiana, one's up in Washington, and they're just bringing them up. They're not even in full production. Bang, and but the more interesting thing. So all of these searches were done internationally. There were researchers in Germany, there were researchers in Italy, there were researchers all over the US looking at pieces of this data, looking for evidence of this gravitational wave. But the other more interesting part is that, well, I don't know, it's not more interesting. While they're doing these searches, the question that you would have to ask, I think, so how do you know what you saw? And it turns out when they started with these interferometer dozens of years ago, they actually didn't know what a colliding black hole would look like because the 10 equations hadn't been solved. And so there was a major effort between actually MPS, and we also funded it in my group, to try to get simulations that could scale to the degree necessary so that you would actually be able to model what does two black holes look like when they collide. And then you could match it to what you found. So it's really this wonderful marriage of, you know, this doesn't happen without the kinds of collaboration over a long period of time with many involved. It's not just, I mean, certainly the originators, Kip Thorne and others involved in this, really had this amazing vision. But to realize this vision, you know, it wouldn't just happen on its own. It's really deep and wide. So I think, you know, not everything is that once in a lifetime. But you see, we see evidence of the opportunity for this really in the small as well. So this is the nexus of food, energy, and water. Again, another engineering, hydrology, geo, actually economic. And in this case, this was an award last year that we made. We participated with geo and engineering and SBE in a solicitation called Innovations. And this one was really saying, could you, using, and again, interagency USGS data on water, could you construct a predictive map of the U.S. Water supply, quantity and quality, and then could you do decisions or predict the effect of decisions one community might make in Ohio, and how that might affect the water, the quality and the quantity of the water elsewhere, both economically and from a environmental point of view. And so I don't know, this it's too early to say how successful this will be, but I think, again, this is using data that's already there, it's using much infrastructure that's already there, but really trying to put together a new type of predictive model that is publicly available and could help in decision making. And then along with that, when you start to integrate decision-making and policy, as has been done for a number of years with earthquake simulations and building codes in California, then you really start to feel the pressure on the credibility of that research and how good is it, and do you know how good it is? And that's another frontier. And again, this is in the small that we made Bill Miller in our group is our neuroscientist, and he did 6 eagers in the neuroscience area, and several of them, one was to Russ Poldrak at Stanford, also trying to do computational reproducibility, and this one was to Randall Burns at Johns Hopkins, saying, again, getting at that transparency. Can you do quality control and community experiments, and can you make that very transparent and visible? And of course, it's not all new infrastructure. It's using Jupyter, it's using computing resources available either from the cloud, in some cases in Exceed, but it's really trying to manage the experiment with the computation in the experiment and do it in a community-based way. So I think this approach to doing research is really going to become more and more prominent, I think. And I think as we get into data science more deeply and across the disciplines, and as we try to really establish a way for research to influence and inform, we're really going to have to up our game on transparency and credibility, understanding and being able to represent the quality of the research. And we even see a bit of this coming up in MRIs. This is just an example of an MRI at the University of Chicago. And I believe Barak is also a CASC member. Barali, he is. And so this is really trying to capture instrument data, ensure the quality, and manage the data itself, again, a bit in the workflow, but more work. This is more focused on the data quality. So a little bit on big ideas. I mentioned there were 6. This was announced in Science in about a year ago. And it was really looking forward as a new administration, no matter what it was. This was midsummer, really trying to say, okay, let's reimagine what are some new frontiers that things that we are ripe to investigate and where we've done the groundwork. And there were 6 of them. Many of them have a deep cyber infrastructure component. In fact, almost all of them do. But I wanted to at least list them here. They're certainly, these are long-term quantum, for example. Some of these are interagency, some of them are not. All of them are multi-directorate, multidisciplinary. And then there were 4 process ideas, and the only one I'd call out here is this convergent research, which is how do we grow the ability for those from different disciplines to be able to work together effectively, and really doing that in a way, because all of these are going to require some element. All of the research frontiers require some element of that. So I'll talk quickly about harnessing the data revolution, and so I can leave some time for questions. So this is really focused in how do we use what's happening in data science and new types of data, new ways of analyzing and computing with that data. How do we bring that power to the research enterprise, to advance science and engineering? And so there are 5 themes. There's an internal working group. We've looked at existing programs. We're looking to the future about possible new programs, both on in just every area. And so we're looking at it from the science domain perspective. What kinds of systems and algorithms, what research would we need to do in those areas? What are the underlying foundations? So systems and algorithms, mining, machine learning, how do you set up benchmark data sets? Which communities need them? What are they? How are they managed? Integrity and accessibility, privacy and protection, many fields in education where you have student populations, clearly in the bio some, and then the human data interface associated with that. And then a little bit on foundations, what are the theoretical underpinnings, and then on the cyber infrastructure, again, robust, open data as a first-class object. And in parallel with that, over the last year, we've really, this is still very conceptual, but we have that view of cyber infrastructure where everything is operating with everything else. But we also have a view of what is the architecture, the technical architecture of such an ecosystem. And again, noting that we are not the only players in this ecosystem. We're not even the dominant player. So how do we optimize for the whole? And as we look down this stack, how do we get increased sharing and leave the disciplinary above? So it's not a new idea. But I think as we're looking at the cyber infrastructure investments, we're being very deliberate about where we invest and why, and what partnerships we form, both internationally and across agencies. And again, I think this is really ripe for input, because as I said, I don't think we're going to change that most of the cyber infrastructure that supports research in this country is at the institutions like this one. And so making our investment allow you to be more capable is really a clear priority. So as we look at the harnessing the data revolution, we see that it's going to impact at all levels in various ways. And we're just right now starting to internally say, what are the kinds of activities we'd want to have and what time frame? So it's very, very early on. We're also in discussion with our facilities groups, our facility teams and the directorates as well, because they clearly have a role here. So these are the kinds of activities that one might see as we develop that. So using both existing and new programs. So, and then a little bit on looking forward. In 2013, we asked the National Academy to do a study on future directions for NSF's support. So again, specifically for NSF support for advanced computing infrastructure. And that report was finalized in August of 2016. And we specifically asked it to be near term. What kinds of investments do we want to make in the 17 to 20? So it was a rich document that with good observations. I mean, if you're interested, I think it is worth a read, particularly the beginning part. It made observations about who's investing where. We also looked at this too. Whether things, how fast was data science coming, how impactful, looking at the end of Dennard scaling, how we can keep science moving forward as that hits the research enterprise. And, you know, it selected 4 categories of recommendation. One was leadership. What is the specific role NSF should play in leadership? How do we go about meeting needs? How do we stay and help the research community keep on the cutting edge? And how do we approach sustainability of the investments? Because that's a big issue. Again, the human even more than the technical on that side. And so I should say there's 7 recommendations, but each one had 3. There are actually 20 recommendations. So it's a lot, and we're still chewing on it, but we are beginning to take it to heart and take it also in the context of something that came along, again, in almost the same time frame, and that was this interagency collaboration and coordination for U.S. leadership in advanced computing. And it identified NSF as one of 3 lead agencies with DoD and DOE, but 8 agencies participating more broadly. And they that there's a role identified for NSF specifically in that, and the objectives are the 5 objectives that I've simplified, 3 of which are the focus for NSF. So what I would say is that we have a website available. If you just search for NSF NSCI, you'll find it. We did a number of activities, planning, coordination, and community engagement. In 16, we did some pilot activities in 17, and 18 was when we intended the full-scale funding to initiate. So we haven't submitted our 18 budget yet, but we will be soon. And this is just an idea of the investment in 2017. It was on the order of 30 million, engineering, physics, and CISE, geo as well. And then in line with that, as well as at the advice of the National Academy study, we developed and started to circulate a roadmap of these are the investments at the national scale we'll be making on the resource side and in the rough time frame. And then I want to move on to, again, looking to the future a little bit. We're ending a 5-year initiative that was NSF-wide on cyber infrastructure for the 21st century. It had a number of activities. Some of those activities will be continuing, DIBS and SI2. Some of the other activities will probably sunset. But these activities are now transitioning primarily either under the NSCI, and I apologize for that D4SDA, it really will end up being the harnessing data. The cyber infrastructure activities will transition to those 2 efforts beginning in 18. So it's a complex enterprise, and we are a key player, but clearly not the only player in this space. So community input is really critical in this space. So I've indicated a few areas where we engaged National Academy. We also have engaging our fellow federal agencies and the national, and the second one, the National Strategic Computing Initiative. We have an ongoing advisory committee meeting, but we have lots of other, we have PI meetings, we have the Internet 2 meetings, the CASC meeting, all of those are important. And so I really wanted to mention that today is the last day we have an active RFI. The National Academy study really prompted us to look at things a bit more holistic and look out to the 2030 timeframe. So the opportunity of CIF 21 ending, the National Academy report, and NSCI being public, we really seized that opportunity and put out a call for the kinds of future needs for advanced cyber infrastructure in the 2030 time horizon. So we want to look longer term. And I know a number of groups, we've tried to get the word out. I know a number of groups have and are participating, but there's still a few hours left if you want to send in individual. So, and I think, excuse me, we are transitioning to a new administration. We're preparing our fiscal 18 budget. I can really say that the emphasis and reliance on CI is really apparent across. So it's really the choices and priorities. That we really have to focus on the choices and priorities. And we're being informed by many activities, and key among them are this NAS report, the NSCI activity, the big ideas, and the ongoing RFI that's ending today. So anyway, with that, I think I'll conclude. I've only left a few minutes for questions, but I'll stick around so I also could take them afterwards. Are there any questions other than the one brave person?
I'm curious about the mid-range instrumentation program. Do you know when that will begin?
So I think what we're, to be quite candid, I think we will look first at the opportunities at that 70 to 100 that weren't possible before. But as we do those, we expect at least one, if not, oh, thank you so much. We expect one, if not more, to be cyber infrastructure. So I want to use that as an opportunity to work on this agile process. And then I'm hopeful we could take this down because, frankly, just candidly, that process that exists now is so heavyweight, so ponderous. I don't want to bring it into everything in that middle space. It's really got to be simplified. So, so.
Any other questions?
So, can you talk about whether there's any discussion about how HPC education fits into the objectives and training the workforce of scientists that are coming through? So
I'm glad you asked that question. So the workforce issue is another one like the data issue. It's going to take a long time, I think, to solve all the issues. We did a training solicitation this year for the first time. So there was a training solicitation that, that was, I almost want to say 6 months ago, but the panels have already happened for that. And we'll be making the awards for them. Actually, I'm hoping actually after, if assuming the appropriations get beyond the end of the month, so in this fiscal year. We're just waiting. We only have budget through the end of April. So but this is a big deal for Congress, and I'm sure that they'll address, because it's government-wide. So we are planning to make the first awards on training, and there are a variety of sizes this year. And we'll continue that activity. I think we need to recast HPC in that broader light, though, including some of the new kinds of HPC. So, for example, when Blue Waters came online, which is our largest system at UIEC, we envisioned all kinds of things like molecular dynamics, like magnetohydrodynamics simulations, but we didn't envision that we would be doing, the first high-resolution 3D map of the entire Arctic based on, NSA's data, satellite data, which is 1 to 2 meter resolution. So we never anticipated that. And some of the research that's happening on some of our smaller systems now, like the work at Carnegie Mellon that was done on the bridges to, for the first time, beat the top poker players. That's a different kind of HPC. It's using bridges. Same thing as some of the dark web analysis that Chris Mattman from JPL Caltech is doing with DARPA funding on one of the Texas systems. So, and that's not that the simulations are going away by any means. The higher resolution that we need to do to really do predictive seismic analysis so that you could actually have an earthquake, see an earthquake in time to warn people, that takes a lot higher resolution. But I think we need to figure out in this broader space how to take advantage of that and do the training, because we're not going to train our way out of this completely. We have to make it easier and more intuitive. And what are your ideas about that? What do you think?
I don't know how to respond. I'm just trying to digest what you're telling me. I can talk to you more later.
Okay, I would. So, but that's the tip. The other one is that career path. I think in particular for those who are in this transdisciplinary, and for those who are cyber infrastructure experts that may be in one or more disciplines, making sure that they have a stable career path that they can see, that they can progress along. I think that's a longer term. I mean, from how we're funding in the career, the types of researchers we're funding in our career awards, I can see that they're going to have trouble, because they don't necessarily fit in one academic department. And so I think there's work to do there as well. So, anyway.
Okay, thank you very much for
Thank you.
Ms. Qualters. Let's give a round of applause. So the next speaker will be Mark Griswold, who is a professor at the Department of Radiology and also at UH. I'm trying to do two things at the same time here and probably not doing a good thing at it. And he is, or do you want to?
Yeah, I can switch out here.
Okay.
Thanks. We'll see if our infrastructure works here.
So, Dr. Mark Griswold has been very involved with the Microsoft collaboration on the HoloLens project. His main focus of research is on the MRI, not the instrumentation, but the magnetic resonance imaging science. And so
Let's take the floor.
All right, thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me here today. I probably could have given 3 or 4 different talks on different topics where my life depends on the cyber infrastructure that's here. From the HPC to the fast networking to just the everyday help. My decade of experience here is really dependent on Roger and Sue and just the whole rest of the team. So thank you for doing that. And thanks also to Irene and everybody at the NSF for helping us build the infrastructure that we've got here. Completely by chance, I was emailing back and forth with Jeff Dirk, who's our Dean of Engineering, and another student last night. And Jeff sent me this slide, which is the early ARPANET from 1973. You can see that case is right there. This was the logical map. Just a little bit of history. Roger mentioned it. I don't really have anything more to say, but just there's a long history of cyber infrastructure here. But I'm going to talk about something slightly different and slightly much more, I hope, into the future. And that has to do with, as Adrian said, our work on HoloLens and holographic visualization. And our story starts somewhat different, but I like to start with this Grace Hopper quote, which is the most dangerous phrase in the language is we've always done it that way. And if you think about our lives today, there's very few things that you can look at and say that we've always done them that way. We wear different clothes than we did a few hundred years ago. We don't ride around on horses anymore. We eat very different food. Almost everything about our lives is different. And there's one thing that I can think of that is done pretty much the way it was done in the beginning. And it came to light because of the new health education campus that we're building with Cleveland Clinic down the road. And the challenge that came through to us was to figure out a way to teach anatomy without a cadaver. And if you think back about it, this is the way that we've taught medical students forever. In a way, cadavers and this kind of dissection actually predates medicine. So, we have pictures like this of the early dissections, and this is truly the way it's always been done. And so when the administration asked us to take on this project to say, effectively, we have 4 years to overturn many hundreds of years of the way things have been done, it was pretty daunting, at least. But the time is right for this kind of change. We know a lot more about the human body than we did a few hundred years ago. We've got a lot of good anatomy. And then my other day job is taking pictures of the inside of people. And we're really good at this now. So we can get down to sub-millimeter resolution through the whole body in about 4 seconds right now. And so we know a whole lot about anatomy that we didn't before. So the question was, could we teach students this way? And our initial attempts at this were all based on what was essentially a large touch screen. We were trying to replicate the experience of doing a cadaver dissection, but doing it on a flat surface. And our initial studies showed that we could do this. The students learned anatomy pretty well, but there were clearly pieces that were missing. The body is a very complex three-dimensional thing. This is showing some of the white matter pathways in the brain. And even though you can get some idea of the shape of these structures through this rotation, I can promise you that there are details in here that you just can't see in this two-dimensional representation. So there was a big hole that was still there. So fast forward a little bit to 2014, Toby Cosgrove, who's the president of the clinic, happened to be on a boat trip with his friend Craig Mundy, who at the time was the head of Microsoft Research. And they started talking about this problem, and Craig said, you need to come visit us. So they went with Barbara Snyder, our president, and about a week later, I got a phone call from Barbara and Pam Davis, the dean of our School of Medicine, saying, I need you on a plane to Redmond next week to go visit Microsoft. Now, if you think back to Microsoft in 2014, I don't think that they would have been viewed as an innovative company. I had actually ditched all of my Windows projects, computers, everything. I have an iPhone still. And so when I got this phone call, I honestly expected to get on a plane and go see this. But what I actually saw was probably the most revolutionary thing that I've seen in about 25 years, which is this device, which is the Microsoft HoloLens. So this is a completely self-contained Windows 10 computer that you wear on your head, and it projects holographic information into your world. So you can have a globe that you can walk around, or you can put a large screen TV on your wall, have the weather on your counter. It really changes the way that you think about interacting with your world. The problem that I'm going to have today, though, is trying to convey this experience to you. So I'm still stuck on this 2D projector, and it's a little bit difficult to describe. So I'm going to just tell you or give you an example, and I'm going to start with my favorite email that I've ever received ever. And it was from Jeff Dirk, the Dean of the School of Engineering, on April 1st, 2015. So April 2nd. So I was there at Microsoft trying the HoloLens in 2014. Actually, Sue Workman was with me on that trip. And I told Jeff Dirk about that visit probably once a week until he was able to go in April. And he's a technically savvy guy. He understands things. He knew exactly what he was getting into. But this was the email that he sent me. So this is April 2nd at about 10 in the morning. Last subject is last night. I literally could not sleep. I kept saying that stuff is real, not videos, mock-ups, etc. It's real. My sense of when the future will happen has changed. The timeline has to be recalibrated. Blown away, truly. I maybe got an hour's sleep. So for somebody technically savvy who knew what he was getting into to say that to me in an email should convey a little bit the magnitude of the change that we're talking about here, even though I'm not going to be able to truly convey it to you. I'll give you some ways around that later on. But let me just go through that first experience for me. So we go to Microsoft not knowing what we're getting into, and they put this device on my head and did abacadabra, and suddenly I was standing on Mars. I could walk along the surface, I could see the rocks, the Curiosity rover was right behind me, could look up at Mount Sharp, and I felt fully as if I was there. And that was already good enough. But then they said, they explained to me that this was a piece of software that was being developed at JPL to actually drive the Curiosity rover across the surface. And if you imagine the importance of things like that, that's not ever going to happen. Nobody's going to make that decision on their own. So these are always going to be team discussions. So they said, well, why don't we bring in another teammate? So here it's John, but for me it was a guy named Victor. And he was about 15 feet away from me, and he said something that I'll never really forget. He said, why don't you come over here and look at this rock? So I walked from here to there to go stand next to Victor, and he explained to me some information about this rock. So for me, this was my first classroom on Mars. So I was there with Victor. We were walking across the surface of the planet, and he was teaching me about a rock. And this is the kind of thing that changed, I think, my life forever going forward. Because that kind of classroom, again, I'll never forget it, but it looks very different than the classrooms that we're used to sitting in. It looks very different than the classroom that we're sitting in today. You know, this is a much more engaging type way to communicate information. So we immediately see that this is the way to teach anatomy. So this is the kind of classroom that we're envisioning for this kind of course, where it's not very complicated. It's just a room that's mostly empty. But our students are standing up and walking around and engaging with the material as if they're in a museum. You can walk up, you can point at things with your hands. It's truly an engaging thing. And then in specific in anatomy, we can do things like take the body apart digitally and walk around and see the different systems and see how they interact with each other just with a few clicks of a button. That's a very different type of learning. Then in addition, we can now start animating things. So I don't know about you guys, but at least for me, I care that my doctor can treat a living person, not a dead person. And so they need to understand, how does the heart beat? How does the blood flow? How do the electrical signals flow in a real living brain? None of which they get from a cadaver type experience. So this is all kind of on the training side, but it doesn't take too much to fast forward to really see how this could impact medicine. So you could imagine a surgeon who's now got a 3D view inside your body. So just like what I was saying earlier, we could take a 3D scan of your whole body in just a few seconds, and then that surgeon is going to hopefully have a better outcome based on their ability to see your body in full 3D. This is going to help nurses and simulated environments, also providing them information in a much more intuitive way. But then we can also start investigating things at different scales. So we know that neurons in the brain, for example, grow into complex 3D shapes, and we know that their exact shape tells us a lot about their function. But that just looks like a flat pressed tree to me, but we know in a real brain it has a very complex three-dimensional shape. That's very difficult to see on a 2D screen, even if I rotate it. When I show you this in a holographic type display, you immediately capture the full 3D environment. Same with proteins. We know that the shape of proteins, their active zones, depends 100% on their shape. And this is a complex three-dimensional problem again. It's very difficult to do this on a 2D screen. Even if I put on 3D glasses, it's not fully, I still can't fully get the 3D view, and in particular, I can't work as a large group on a set of molecules in 3D. When I see this in HoloLens, it's almost trivial to see this full 3D shape. So I think we're going to get better drugs, better polymers, basically better decisions, better understanding about any complex 3D system through this kind of environment. So I think personally this is going to impact all of our lives, huge fraction of them. And I could sit up here and talk for a long time, but I thought I would let somebody very eloquent talk. So this is Alex Kittman. He's one of the two inventors of the HoloLens. He gave a TED Talk that I highly recommend everybody watch, but I just want to play just the first few minutes of it for you because I think it gives you a vision that he had that's driven the development of this technology, and I think it can give you an idea of where we're going forward. Let's see if my audio will work today. Are you able to hear that at all? Okay.
Thousands of years from now, we'll look back at the first century of computing as a fascinating but very peculiar time. The only time in history where humans were reduced to live in 2D space, interacting with technology as if we were machines. A singular 100-year period in the vastness of time where humans communicated, were entertained, and managed their lives from behind a screen. Today, we spend most of our time tapping and looking at screens. What happened to interacting with each other? I don't know about you, but I feel limited inside this 2D world of monitors and pixels. And it is this very limitation and my desire to connect with people that inspires me as a creator. Put simply, I want to create a new reality. A reality where technology brings us infinitely closer to each other. A reality where people, not devices, are at the center of everything. I dream of a reality where technology Sense is what we see, touch, and feel. A reality where technology no longer gets in our way, but instead embraces who we are. I dream of technology on a human path. We have all experienced technology.
So it's 18 minutes. I would go watch the whole thing, but I think that that's a very different type of technology than what we're dealing with today. And when you take this ability to add three-dimensional digital content to your world to its full extreme, you could really see that this is going to impact everything. And the place where this technology is today, a colleague of mine at Microsoft describes it as a 1985 cell phone. So if you think about this thing, it's big, bulky, it's something that everybody can see. But if you think about where this thing was 30 years ago, it was very different, right? It was a big, bulky thing that maybe allowed me to call people in my city. Now I carry around all of human knowledge in my pocket, and my son has one. So just take this kind of thing forward. So these are the kind of things that we can do today. So this is an example of a father helping his daughter fix doing a plumbing repair on her house. So he is just on a tablet, but he's drawing information in her 3D world. So this is a true kind of remote presence that we don't really experience right now. We've taken this further in our anatomy program, and we can actually replicate or transport you as a virtual student into a classroom anywhere on the planet. I've actually taught an anatomy class. It didn't work very well, but it worked a little bit, from a 747 over the Pacific. And I was able to see where my colleagues were and talk to them over that crappy internet connection from an airplane. So this ability to feel like you're with somebody else, somewhere else on the planet, is only going to get more and more extreme. There are currently 3 of these devices flying around on the space station. So that was Scott Kelly playing a game actually just before he came down last year. So this gives us the ability to go up onto the space station to feel what that's like. Kind of on an engineering design front, we can now design digital, let's say manufacture things digitally before we manufacture them analog. So this is designing a motorcycle, a full-size human-scale motorcycle in a digital way, so that when we actually make the motorcycle for real, we do it right the first time. So you can imagine this changing all kinds of engineering and design principles just throughout almost any field. But this also then goes over to the arts. So this is a 3D scan that we did of Apollo the Python Slayer. It's the 2,500-year-old sculpture that's right in the front of the Cleveland Museum of Art. This sculpture did not actually look like this in the beginning. It has dents in it, for example, that we can fix. So there's a dent in his leg that's gone. He was originally a bronze color, so we can recolor him bronze, for example. And then we can put him into a kind of garden where he was originally sitting. And then we can bring in some aspects of the Greek culture where he was originally. So not only can we be transported from here to a jet over the Pacific, but now we can go back 2,500 years and experience what life was like. So again, the potential here is just nearly infinite. That we've almost removed this, our fixed place in time, and can allow us to go far beyond where we are today. So I want to close just with some implications on cyber infrastructure, because they're not small. If you think about today, we do a lot of stuff in 2D, a lot of web pages in 2D, but now imagine all of these things becoming 3D. So all of our content, the size of that content, our ability to compress it, is all going to be dependent on our ability to process 3D information and 4D information instead of just 2D information. So the computation that's going to be required is going to be more. Also, obviously the network speed is going to be more. And then I want to bring in just one more example of where things are going. This is going to be a couple-minute long video, but I think you guys will like it. This is something that Microsoft put out last year. Again, this is now. This isn't 50 years from now.
Hi, today we're going to show you an exciting new technology that could fundamentally change the way that people will communicate in the future. Imagine being able to virtually teleport from one space to another in real time. Hey, Sergio.
Yes, Ram.
How does it feel like to be holoported?
It feels great to be holoported.
So if Sergio is to wear his HoloLens device, and I'm going to wear mine, we can see each other in full 3D in real time. We can interact and communicate as if we're co-present. Sergio, can you walk around my space? Can you walk behind this chair? So we're doing everything to give the impression that Sergio and I are present in the same space. Sergio, let's just do a high five. That's
Bye-bye.
great. Thank you, Sergio. We call this technology holoportation. Now, to make all this happen, we've had to create a new type of 3D capture technology. I'm surrounded by these 3D cameras that we've developed in our team. Each of them is capturing me from a separate viewpoint, and we're fusing this data together to create a temporally consistent model, as you can see reconstructed live behind me. Now, the camera that's filming me has a HoloLens tracking system attached, and this allows us to take these 3D models and composite them in real time into the real world, as you can see here. And that gives you a sense of the fidelity of the reconstructions that we can achieve. Once we have these reconstructions, we can texture them. We can then compress the data and transmit the data over to the other side. Over on the other side, a user wearing a HoloLens can see these remote participants live in their space as if they're co-present. And that's what we're showing you picture in picture. Now imagine using this type of capture technology to connect with family members who are thousands of miles away. And that's exactly what we're going to demonstrate to you right now. My daughter is stood in a similar capture rig somewhere else in our lab. And she's going to holoport into my space, and I'm going to interact with her wearing my HoloLens.
Hi, Bob, I miss you.
Hey, Lilia, I miss you too.
When you coming home?
I'm coming home very soon. Let me get out of your way. Hey, Lilia, you can only hear me, you can't see me, but what are these toys?
I have toys to show you. This one is name is Elmo.
Elmo?
And he can sing.
He can sing, wow. And what about the other one?
The other one is called Tina, and I like it because it has different stuff.
Well, that's so cool. So Lilia, can you climb up on this chair that's behind you?
Climb?
Yeah, climb up. Be very careful. Now I'm going to count to 3 and I want you to jump. 1, 2, 3, jump! That was so cool. Oh, let me get out of your way again.
I like you so much.
I love you too.
Come home soon.
I'll be home very soon. Bye-bye. Now in that example, we were demonstrating live 3D capture, but our system is capable of another thing. We can actually record and play back that entire session. Now this is almost like reversing through time. And if I wear my HoloLens device, it's almost like walking into a living memory that I can see through another pair of eyes from all these different perspectives. And because this is 3D content, we can miniaturize it onto this coffee table and experience it in a more convenient manner. And this becomes a magical way of experiencing these live captured memories.
All right, so that's, in my mind, as close as we can get to a Star Trek teleporter as we've ever seen. But let's just quickly run through what's involved here. So there's a set of multiple cameras all watching him in the room. They all have to interpret what's there. They have to calculate the 3D distances to all those points. They have to merge all the information from all the different cameras, put them together into a comprehensive picture of the person that's in front of them, compress that, send it out over the network to another rig, decompress it, and display it, all at over 60 frames a second. So the computational backend here is massive. You can also imagine that the networking that's going to be required is massive. But the impact of this kind of thing is, in my mind, even bigger. So just imagine that for a minute that you've got the ability to talk to your parents or your grandparents thousands of miles away. And if you go back and think about that video, there was a certain point where he was talking to his daughter where you lose track of who's in the room and who's not. And especially when he miniaturizes it down onto the table like this, they now have a memory of being together in the same room, even though they were not ever together. So imagine this with your family, but also your scientific collaborators, your work colleagues. This is truly a different way of being together in a way that where you're not necessarily physically together. I think this is really going to change the way that we interact as humans, and this is here now or coming soon, again, not 50 years from now. So I'm just going to blow through this, but we're running this, directing this out of the Interactive Commons, which is the new organization on campus. We're housed just outside the door here to the left over in the Twing building in the basement there. We have the opportunity twice a week for people to come do demos. There'll be an announcement in the daily soon, but it's Mondays and Thursdays. And if you want information on that, you can contact me. And other than that, I just want to say thank you again.
Is there any questions? Maybe one. Okay.
Very impressive, Mark. Very
Thanks,
cool. This might be a silly question, but I'm a detail person. The dad stepped away when his daughter walked in front. Would the system crash if he didn't step away?
No, she would just go, just straight through. But it's actually, again, one of these things that I can't really communicate to you, and I'm going to ruin some of the surprise for some of the people. But one of my favorite parts of my job is showing people their first anatomical model. So there's a person who's standing in the room, and we always set it up so that people look at the front side and then go to the back side. We've done over 1,500 demos for people, so 1,500 separate people have come through. 100% of them walk around. So think about it, like if I ask you to walk from there to there, you would just walk in a straight line, but people walk in a circle because there's something that appears to be a real person standing in between, even though they could just walk straight through. Yeah, it's a different reality.
So when you're teaching multiple students all wearing HoloLenses on a single model, how is the system managing the geospatial relationship of that augmented point so that as people are moving in concert, they're all seeing it at a single focal level?
So that's a great question. The device actually has 7 different cameras in the front, both optical and infrared, that are constantly mapping the environment at around millimeter resolution. And it can piece together, I'm trying to get a good picture of it, and I'm failing miserably. And those can be stacked up, So there's seven cameras in the front there, and it can build up an environment that's essentially infinitely large as well. So it knows where it is in the environment, and each of the individual HoloLenses all know where they are. So they're all synchronized through a system that we've built to display the same object in the same spot. But it's updating, so I didn't go through the details, so it's a 3-point-something gigahertz CPU in there, but it has a custom chip that's running at about a teraflop that's just doing the environmental mapping. So you're wearing what I used to call a supercomputer on your face, and it's not burning you. You know, it's so I used to be at UIUC 20 years ago, you know, and this thing that I wear on my head now is more powerful than the supercomputer I used to use there.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That's a great presentation, and that will lead us to the break time. And Sanjay will have some announcement. Yeah, please give it.